Calling a 3-bet pre-flop. What a call versus a 3-bet really means. When you call a 3-bet, you accept a low stack-to-pot ratio environment and you bet on equity realization. You are not seeing a flop. You are investing to realize equity through position, board coverage, and post-flop leverage. In online pools with rake, autopilot calls get punished. Your default is disciplined folds, selective calls, and aggressive 4-bets. First, in position, calling can be profitable because your equity realization R is higher. Second, out of position, calling shrinks fast because your equity realization R collapses. Third, against a linear versus polarized ranges 3-bet, your calling thresholds change. If you cannot name the villain's 3-bet construction, you cannot justify a call. TPP Exploit Framework. First, the exploit, fold the rake-dragged, low-realization trash that online pools overcall. Second, the risk, overfolding versus aggressive regulars who print with 3-bets. Third, the counter, add 4-bet bluffs with clean blockers and unblockers, and defend more in position. Range architecture, linear versus polarized 3-bets. A 3-bet can be linear versus polarized ranges. You must infer which one you face from position and sizing. Big blind versus button is often wider and more linear in many online pools. Small blind versus button is often tighter and more polarized. Linear 3-bets crush weak-suited junk. Polarized 3-bets allow more calls that dominate the bluffs and realize well. First, linear 3-bet. Expect pocket tens and better, ace-queen suited and better, ace-king, plus strong-suited broadways. Second, polarized 3-bet. Expect premiums plus wheel-suited bluffs like ace-5 suited through ace-2 suited and suited junk. Third, your job is to avoid calling hands that are dominated by the value region. In tracking software, sort villains 3-bet by position. If the pool is skewed, build your defense around population tendencies. TPP Exploit Framework. First, the exploit versus linear 3-betters, tighten calls, and 4-bet more linear for value. Second, the risk, you become face-up and easy to play against. Third, the counter, mix in suited connector calls and some low-frequency 4-bet bluffs with blockers and unblockers. MDF and the non-negotiable defense baseline. Minimum defense frequency, MDF, is your baseline against automatic profit 3-bets. It is not your final strategy. Online pools do not 3-bet perfectly, so you should defend based on expected value, not pride. If villain's 3-bet is too tight, you do not hit MDF. You fold and they lose expected value. First, if villain over 3-bets, you defend wider, especially in position. Second, if villain under 3-bets, you fold more and you stop set mining without odds. Third, if villain uses big sizings, your required equity rises and your call region shrinks. MDF protects your range from being farmed. Expected value decides if a specific hand belongs. TPP Exploit Framework. First, the exploit, overfold versus tight. 3-bet ranges and deny them rake-free steals. Second, the risk versus balanced players, you leak by folding too much. Third, the counter. Track 3-bet frequency by position, then adjust toward MDF only when needed. The call bucket, set mining done like a pro. Set mining is an expected value problem. You need implied odds and a villain range that pays. Against a tight range with high card density, sets get paid. Against capped, whiff-heavy bluffs, you win smaller. Hope poker is calling with pocket fours because if I flop a set, I stack him. That is not a model. First, best candidates in position, 2s through 6s, when stacks are 100 big blinds plus and villain's 3-bet is value-heavy. Second, worst candidates out of position, 2s through 6s, because your equity realization, R, is poor. Third, bad candidates are calls versus huge 3-bet sizes where stack-to-pot ratio collapses and you cannot win enough. Set mining falls apart in rake-heavy games when you are not stacking value. Multi-tabling amplifies this leak because you miss thin post-flop edges. Scenario box. Hero, 4 of clubs, 4 of hearts. Flop, Queen of spades, 8 of hearts, 4 of spades. Action. Button opens. Big blind 3 bets, hero calls, in position. Big blind C bets small, hero calls. Turn bricks, big blind, barrels big. First, you are uncapped on sets, villain is not capped. Your line is call, call, then raise turn or river based on runout. Second, versus range betting, slow playing keeps bluffs alive. Versus aggressive barrelers, a turn raise prince. Third, your goal is to build a pot without letting villain check down. TPP exploit framework. First, the exploit. Call pre with small pairs only when villain's value density will pay stacks. Second, the risk. Overcalling small pairs versus large 3 bets, you burn expected value fast. Third, the counter. If villain stops paying off, reduce set mining and add more 4-bet bluffs instead. The call bucket, suited connectors. In position. Suited connectors win by realizing equity and pressuring capped ranges. They are not calls because they play pretty. In position, hands like 8-7 suited can realize well, because you control pot size and you can float and stab. Out of position, the same hand becomes a reverse implied odds trap against linear value. First, best in position candidates, 7-6, suited through 10, 9 suited, some 5-4 suited when 3-bet is polarized and sizing is smaller. Second, worst candidates, offsuit connectors and gappers. They fail equity realization, are benchmarks. Third, board coverage matters. Suited connectors protect you from being capped versus uncapped on low boards. You care about blockers and unblockers. Calling with 8-7. Suited unblocks high card bluffs and keeps villain's air in. Scenario box. Hero, 8 of spades, 7 of clubs. Flop, Jack of hearts, 6 of spades, 2 of clubs. Action. Cutoff opens. Button 3 bets. Hero calls. Button C bet small. Hero calls. Turn is 5 of hearts. Button checks. First, when villain checks turn, they often become more capped versus uncapped. Second, you can bet turn at a high frequency. You pick up equity and fold out ace-queen, king-queen type 10 hands. Third, on rivers, choose bluffs that use blockers and unblockers, and avoid punting versus strong check calls. TPP exploit framework. First, the exploit. Call suited connectors in position versus smaller, polarize 3 bets, then attack turn checks. Second, the risk. Overfloating, you pay rake and donate versus double barrels. Third, the counter. If villain starts barreling more, tighten flop calls and shift to 4-bet bluffs pre. Hands you think are calls, but are leaks. Most leaks come from dominated broadways and offsuit hands that cannot realize. They look strong, then they get owned. Calling. King-Jack offsuit versus a competent linear 3-bet is a classic mistake. You make second-best pairs and get value owned. If you are multi-tabling, these are automatic expected value leaks because you will not outplay postflop at scale. First, King-Jack offsuit, Queen-Jack offsuit, Ace-10 offsuit. These are frequently dominated and low realization. Second, weak-suited aces like Ace-9 suited through Ace-6 suited can be traps versus linear value unless 3-bet is polarized. Third, offsuit gappers are pure rake donations. Use tracking software to spot which hands are losing in 3-bet call lines, then cut them without ego. TPP exploit framework. First, the exploit versus tight 3-bets, fold dominated broadways and force villain to win without cooler value. Second, the risk. You overfold and become exploitable to relentless 3-betting. Third, the counter. Add suited connector calls and 4-bet bluffs that leverage blockers and unblockers. Out of position defense, tight, structured, no-hope poker. Out of position, your calling range must be tight and resilient. Your equity realization, ARN, is capped by position. You do not call to guess. You call with hands that can check, call, check, raise, and continue on multiple textures. Against big 3-bet sizing, out-of-position calling collapses. You either 4-bet or fold. First, out-of-position calls lean to pocket pairs and suited broadways that can continue well, like pocket jacks through pocket nines, ace-queen suited through ace, jack suited. Second, hands like 8-7 suited become low frequency, only versus smaller sizings and polarized ranges. Third, hands like king-jack offsuit are mostly folds. They cannot defend multiple barrels. Your goal is to avoid being capped versus uncapped. If your range is 2-pair heavy, good regulars will overbarrel. TPP Exploit Framework. First, the exploit. Fold more out of position versus big 3-bets, and punish with 4-bets when you have the right blockers and unblockers. Second, the risk. You become 4-bet heavy and get 5-bet jammed. Third, the counter. Trap with some strong flats and protect your check range post-flop. Pre-flop checklist, your fast online system. This is your on-table filter when you are multi-tabling, no guesswork. First, identify linear versus polarized ranges from position and sizing. Second, estimate your equity realization R in position high, out of position low. Third, ask if you risk being capped versus uncapped on common boards. Fourth, check blockers and unblockers. Do you block value or unblock bluffs? Fifth, use minimum defense frequency, MDF, as the guardrail, not the goal. If you cannot justify the call in one sentence, fold. That discipline compounds over volume. TPP Exploit Framework. First, the exploit. Play a tight, high realization calling range and let the pool punt with rake-dragged calls. Second, the risk. Missing expected value versus loose 3-betters. Third, the counter. Widen in position and add 4-bet bluffs as your primary adjustment. Key takeaway. The Poker Place Academy. Your default response to a 3-bet is not to call and hope. You defend with structure. First, call in position with hands that realize, especially 2s through 6s for disciplined set mining, and 7-6 suited through 10-9 suited for pressure and board coverage. Second, fold dominated broadways like king-jack offsuit when the 3-bet range is linear and value-dense. Third, build your strategy around equity realization, R, linear versus polarized ranges, and minimum defense frequency, MDF, then exploit population mistakes. Now, let's test your edge. Question 1. When you call a 3-bet, what are you primarily betting on according to the article? Answer, equity realization, R, in a low stack-to-pot ratio environment. Explanation, the article states a call accepts lower stack-to-pot ratio and profits only if you can realize equity through position, coverage, and post-flop leverage. Question 2. How should your calling thresholds change when facing a linear 3-bet range versus a polarized 3-bet range? Answer, versus linear 3-bets, call tighter and 4-bet more for value, versus polarized. 3-bets, more calls can be allowed because you can dominate the bluff region and realize well. Explanation, the article emphasizes linear ranges, crush weak suited junk, while polarized ranges include more bluffs, making some calls higher expected value. Question 3. What role does minimum defense frequency, MDF, play in your 3-bet defense plan according to the article? Answer. Minimum defense frequency is a baseline or guardrail to prevent automatic profit 3-bets, not the final goal. Expected value decides specific hand defenses. Explanation. The text says you don't hit MDF versus tight 3-bets. You can fold more if that's higher expected value. Question 4. According to the set mining section, what conditions make small pocket pairs better candidates to call a 3-bet in position? Answer. In position with 2s through 6s when stacks are 100 big blinds plus and the villain's 3-bet range is value heavy, high card density, so you can win implied odds. Explanation. The article frames set mining as an implied odds expected value problem that works best when villain's range will pay stacks. Question 5. In the suited connector scenario, hero calls pre, calls flop, turn is a 5, and villain checks. What does the article recommend you do on the turn and why? Answer. Bet the turn at a high frequency because the check often caps villain's range, you pick up equity, and you can fold out ace-queen or king-queen type hands. Explanation. The article states the turn check makes villain more capped versus uncapped, creating a profitable stab and pressure spot. Study hard, play smart. That's it for now. I'll see you in the next lesson.